Welcome to Restoria. I'm Arthur, and this is your quiet place for gentle bedtime stories. Get comfortable, take a breath, and let the story slow your thoughts and ease you softly into sleep. Baba Yaga's Quiet Evening. Dad's hut had walked all day, and now it was tired. It stood at the edge of a birch clearing where the last of the light lay across the moss, and it lowered itself down the way an old hen lowers itself over eggs. First one great yellow leg folded, then the other. The floor tilted, settled, and went still. Inside, on the shelf above the stove, a row of clay pots leaned together and then leaned back, and a spoon that had been left on the table slid an inch and stopped. Baba Yaga put out one hand to the wall without looking, the way you steady a thing you have steadied 10,000 times, and waited for the little world of the room to come to rest around her. When it did, she let go of the wall. The fire in the stove had burned down to a bed of coals while the hut walked, and those coals were the first thing she tended. She crouched at the iron mouth of the stove, her knees speaking their old complaint, and she fed in 3 sticks of birch and 1 knot of pine, and she watched the flame find them. The pine caught with a small hiss and a smell of resin that filled the whole room at once. That smell was the smell of every evening she could remember. Resin and ash and the cold green breath of the forest coming in under the door. She breathed it in without hurry, and the fire climbed, and the light on the walls grew from red to gold. They called her many things in the villages beyond the trees. The old woman of the wood, the one who lives where the path runs out. Mothers used her name to bring children in at dusk, and the children grew and used it on their own children, and none of them had ever walked far enough into the forest to find that the truth of her was mostly this: an old woman, a stove, a pot that wanted filling before the night came down. She had heard the stories they told over the years, carried to her on the tongues of travelers who did not know whose fire they were holding their hands to. She did not mind them. Stories kept people at a respectful distance, and distance at her age was a kind of peace. The cat came out from under the stove where he had ridden the whole walk, curled in the dark by the coals. He was grey as wood smoke and older than any cat had a right to be, and he stretched now from nose to tail, one leg trembling, and then he sat and looked at her with the patience of a creature who knew supper was coming and knew, too, that complaining never made it come faster. Baba Yaga looked back at him. Yes, she told him. Yes, I know, in a moment. And the cat blinked once, slowly, which was his way of agreeing, and settled his tail around his feet to wait. On the table sat the day's gathering, still in the cloth she had bundled it in that morning at the far edge of the wood. She unknotted the cloth and let it fall open. Mushrooms, brown-capped and cool, smelling of the earth they had come out of. A handful of last autumn's barley she had traded a village girl for a cure against warts. 3 onions with their papery skins, a knob of root the color of old ivory that she alone in the whole forest knew the last name of. She laid them out in a row on the boards, and she stood over them a moment with both hands flat on the table, taking their measure, letting the shape of the soup arrange itself in her mind before she lifted the knife. Suddenly, the knife was older than the cat and nearly as old as she was. Its handle had worn to the shape of her grip, and the blade had been sharpened so many thousand times that it had grown thin as a willow leaf. She took up the first onion and set the edge to it, and the skin parted with that particular dry whisper that no other sound in the world quite matches. Under the papery brown, the flesh was white and wet and cool. She cut it in half, She cut the halves in slices and the slices in fine pieces, and her hands did the work without her needing to watch them, because they had cut 10,000 onions and would, if the world allowed it, cut 10,000 more. Her eyes stung the way they always did, and a single tear ran the crease of her cheek, and she wiped it on her shoulder and went on cutting. Even a witch weeps over onions. It is the one honest grief the kitchen asks of anyone. Even the mushrooms she did not cut fine, she tore them, because a mushroom torn gives more of itself to a broth than a mushroom cut, and this was the kind of thing she knew that no one had taught her and no one remained to teach. She dropped the pieces into the wooden bowl as she went, onion and mushroom together, and the smell of them rose up cool and dark and good. The barley she measured in her palm. The root she pared with the thin knife, thin curls of ivory falling away to show the paler flesh beneath, and this she cut into coins, and the coins into halves. When it was all done, she stood back and looked at the bowl heaped with the day's harvest, and she gave the smallest nod, the nod of a woman satisfied with an ordinary thing done properly. The pot lived on its hook by the stove, black iron, big enough to bathe a child in, dented on one side where it had fallen from a shelf during a bad wind 100 winters back. She lifted it down with both hands and both knees, grunting, and set it on the boards. Water came from the barrel by the door, and the barrel had filled itself in the afternoon rain, so the water was sweet and tasted of birch bark and sky. She dipped the ladle and poured, and dipped and poured until the pot held enough. Into the water went the barley first, to soften and swell. Then she carried the pot to the stove, and this was the part her body liked least, the lifting and the turning with the weight swinging, and she took it in short movements, and she got the pot onto the iron top where the fire could reach it, and she stood a moment with one hand pressed to the base of her back, breathing, letting the ache settle back into the general ache of being very old and yet upright. Above her head the rafters were hung with the summer's work. Bundles of herbs tied at the stem and left to dry, turning the ceiling into a hanging meadow that breathed its scent down into every meal she made. First one great Yuva herbs. There was yarrow for the blood and chamomile for the sleep, and a grey-green bundle of the thing the villagers called Mother of the Woods, which had no use in medicine at all, and which she hung there only because she liked the smell of it when the fire heated the room. She reached up, feeling along the bundles with fingers that knew each one by touch, and she took down a little thyme and a little of the wild marjoram, and she crumbled them between her palms over the pot, and the crushed leaves fell into the water like green rain. The soup would take its time now, and time was the one thing she had never been short of. She fed the fire again and drew her chair close, the tall chair with the back carved in a pattern of leaves that some maker long turned to dust had cut for her as payment for a kindness she could not now recall the shape of. She lowered herself into it. The wood took her weight and gave its familiar creak, the note it always gave, the note that meant the day's standing was done. The cat rose from beside the stove and crossed to her and stood looking up, and she patted her knee once, and he made the effort of his old jump and landed in her lap and turned 3 times and lay down. Under her hand his side rose and fell. The purr started deep in him, felt more than heard, an engine running low against her palm. Beyond the one window the clearing was going blue. The birches stood pale against the coming dark, their bark catching the last of the sky, and between their trunks the forest deepened into the color of a bruised plum, and then into no color at all. Somewhere out there, a stream she had known before the villages ever stood was running over its stones, saying the thing it always said, which was nothing, which was only water going where water goes. She listened to it. The fire ticked and settled. The pot began at last to think about boiling, the first faint sounds gathering in it, a click and a knock and the beginning of a murmur. While the pot came to its low murmur, she let her eyes travel the room the way an old person does at the end of a day, taking a quiet inventory of the things that have outlasted so much. The great stove filled one whole corner, whitewashed clay gone amber with the years of fires, wide enough on top to sleep on, and on the coldest nights of the deepest winters, she still climbed up and lay on the heated bricks the way her own grandmother had, in a hut whose location she could not have found on any map. Against the far wall stood the mortar, tall as a barrel, carved from a single piece of oak. The stories said she flew in it. The stories said she rode it through the night sky, driving it on with the pestle, sweeping her tracks away behind her with a broom of birch. She looked at the great wooden thing standing in its corner, holding nothing now but a folded blanket and a basket of pine cones for the fire, and something that on a younger face would have been a smile moved the deep lines around her mouth. First one great yellow on the heated bricks the way her O's slipping along the crib side of her bedroom. Perhaps once, perhaps a very long time ago, there had been flying. She did not now know for certain which of her memories were things that had happened and which were things the villagers had said so often that they had grown roots in her and started to seem like her own. It did not trouble her. A life as long as hers was not a straight road you could walk back along, checking each stone. It was more like the forest itself, all the paths grown over, the old clearings filled in with saplings, and here and there a place where the light came down through the leaves in a way that made you stop, though you could not say why the place mattered, only that it did. The mortar held pine cones now. That was enough. A thing did not have to keep doing what it had always done to be worth keeping. The notes came side, along the top of the fence that ringed the little yard. The lights were beginning to wake. The villagers, when they whispered, spoke of skulls on the fence posts, eyes burning in the dark, a ring of fire to warn away the living. The truth was gentler and stranger than that. Years back she had set a little glass lamp on each post, and into each lamp she had coaxed a small flame that needed no oil and never went out, only slept through the daylight and woke at dusk. They were waking now, one by one down the fence line, a soft amber coming up in each glass globe as the dark deepened, so that the yard sat inside a low crown of light. She had made them for herself, for the pleasure of looking out at them, and if travelers took them for something fearsome and hurried on their way, well, that was travelers keeping themselves at a distance, and distance was peace, and she had made her peace with peace years back. The pot was murmuring in earnest now. She lifted the cat down, gently, one hand under his chest and one beneath, and set him on the floor by the stove, where he grumbled and resettled without truly waking. She rose. The chair let her go with its creak. At the stove, she took up the long spoon, worn like everything else to the shape of her hand, and she stirred, and the barley had begun to swell, and the water had gone the pale gold of weak tea. She tasted it from the back of the spoon, blowing first, and her face did the brief work of judging. It wanted salt. It wanted time. Both of these she had. From the crock by the stove, she took a pinch of the grey salt the coast traders brought once a year, and she scattered it in, and she stirred again, 3 turns one way, and set the spoon across the pot's mouth to rest. Now the mushrooms and the onions could go in, and she tipped the bowl and let them slide down into the water, and the pot took them with a low sound of welcome. The smell that rose then was the true smell of the soup beginning, earth and onion and the green of the herbs, and it moved through the room and found the cat whose nose worked twice in his sleep. She fed the fire. The self looked now. There was nothing to do now but let the heat do its old work, and this, the doing of nothing while something good happened by itself, was among the last pleasures the years had left her, and she had learned to take it fully, without guilt, the way you take a seat by a window when the rain has set in for the evening, and there is nowhere in the world you are needed. The rain, in fact, had been that morning. She thought of it now, the way it had come across the treetops while the hut was walking, a grey curtain drawing over the wood, and how the hut had put its head down into it and kept on, its great legs lifting and falling through the ferns, and how she had sat inside at this same window and watched the drops chase each other down the glass. A hut that walks is a strange thing to call home, and she supposed that to the villagers it was the strangest thing of all about her, stranger than the lamps, stranger than the flying they believed in. But to her it was only home. It went where it wished, and she let it, and in all their years together it had never once taken her anywhere she truly did not want to go. They had grown old at the same rate, she and the hut, and its legs ached now the way her own did, and it walked less far each year and rested more. She did not mind. She was in no hurry to arrive anywhere. There came from the yard the sound she had been half waiting for without knowing it. The geese were home. 3 of them, grey and white and dignified, who lived under the hut in the daytime and wandered the clearing at their own pleasure, and always came in before full dark. She heard their feet on the packed earth, the low conversational murmur they kept up among themselves, the low complaint of the smallest one who complained about everything. They gathered at the foot of the steps and settled, folding down into feathered heaps, tucking their long necks along their backs. She did not need to go to them. She needed nothing from her but the knowing that she was there, the light in the window, the smell of the fire. It was the same thing, she thought, that she needed from them, the knowing that they were there, bodies breathing in the dark near your own. It asks so little and it gives so much. She had not always lived so far from the world. There had been years once when the path from the village still reached her door, when it was worn smooth by the feet of people who came for the things only she could give. A woman whose milk would not come, and the tea of 3 plants that brought it. A boy with a fever the summer physician could not break, carried to her in his father's arms across a whole day of walking, and the poultice she laid on his chest, and the morning he woke clear-eyed and asking for bread. A girl once with a grief too large for her young body, who did not want medicine and could not have named what she wanted, and who Baba Yaga had simply fed bowl after bowl of this same soup and let sit by this same fire until whatever had been frozen in her thawed enough to run again. They had been afraid of her, all of them, every one. They had come because they were more afraid of the thing that had brought them than they were of her, and they had gone home mended, mostly, and told their villagers that the old woman of the wood was terrible, and both of those things were true, and she had never troubled to correct the first because the second was the one that mattered. The path had grown over in the end. The village got its own wise woman, and then a road, and then the kind of physician who wrote things in books, and the huts of the forest passed out of need and into story, which is where old things go to keep living once the world has finished using them. She did not grieve it. A well that no one draws from does not weep for the buckets. It simply keeps its water sweet in case, and waits and is glad of the rain. She had her fire and her cat and her 3 geese and her hut that walked, and the forest that told her its changing story season on season, and the soup that came round again every evening like a bell rung at the same hour. And if you had asked her in the last of these years whether she was lonely, she would have looked at you a while before she understood the question, and then she would have said no and meant it. The pot had come to its full simmer. She rose once more and stirred it, and the barley had opened and softened and thickened the broth to a proper body, and the mushrooms had given up their dark, and the onions had gone to sweetness, and the root had surrendered its faint bitterness that was the whole reason for the root, the note underneath that made the rest taste of more than itself. She tasted again. She closed her eyes to taste it, the way she had been taught by a woman whose face she could not now picture in a kitchen that had stood in a country that went by another name now. It was ready, or near enough that the last of the readiness would come while it waited, which is the truest kind of ready a soup can be. She took down her bowl from the shelf, the one bowl, glazed the brown of a chestnut, chipped at the rim on the side she never drank from. She ladled the soup into it, and the steam came up around her face, and she stood in it a moment, letting it thaw her nose and her eyes, and the deep cold that lived now always in her chest, and that no fire ever entirely reached. For the cat she poured a little of the broth into his saucer, no barley, no onion, which was bad for him, only the gold broth, and she set it on the floor, and he woke for that, of course he woke for that, and came and lapped at it with his eyes half closed. She carried her own bowl to the chair. She sat. She held the bowl in both hands against herself, and felt the heat of it go into her palms and up her arms, and toward that cold center, and she sat like that a while before she ate, only holding it, only being warm. The first spoonful was always the best, and she took it knowing this, without hurry, letting it sit on her tongue. Earth and salt and the green of the herbs, and under it all the faint good bitterness of the root. It tasted of this evening and of every evening. It tasted of the hands that had taught her and the hands that had taught them, a line of women stretching back into the dark behind her, further than any village had kept a memory, each of them standing at a stove at the end of a day, each of them tasting from the back of a spoon and closing her eyes. She was the last of that line, most likely. There was no girl at her elbow learning the tearing of mushrooms, the measure of salt, the reason for the root. And yet, sitting here with the bowl hot against her, she did not feel like an ending. She felt like a page yet being written on. The soup was good. The fire was high. The line went on, at least for tonight, in the one place it had always truly lived, which was not in any daughter, but in the doing of the thing itself. She ate slowly, and between spoonfuls she watched the fire. The pine knot had burned down to a red heart shot through with veins of gold, and the birch was falling into coals, and every little while a log would shift and send up a little commotion of sparks that climbed the black throat of the chimney and were gone. The cat had finished his broth and washed his face and returned to the stones by the stove, and he lay now in that boneless way of cats, poured out flat, one paw over his nose. His side rose. It fell. Across the room the geese were quiet under the floor. 3 round waits settled into the dark, and beyond the fence the forest kept its night watch, the birches pale, the stream telling its endless nothing to the stones. The spoon scraped the bottom of the bowl, and she slowed, making the last of it last. There is a particular pleasure in the end of a bowl of soup eaten by a fire, when the hunger is gone and only the heat remains, and you eat the final spoonfuls not for the body's need but for the brief ceremony of finishing. She tipped the bowl to gather what had pooled at the low side. She took it. The taste had changed as the soup cooled, gone rounder. The flavors settled into one another, the way voices in a room settle when the evening grows late. It was, if anything, better now than when she had first ladled it. Most things were, she thought, if you were willing to wait for them and to let them be what the waiting made them. When the bowl was empty, she did not get up at once to wash it. That could wait for morning. Many things could wait for morning, she had learned, that in her younger centuries she would have leapt to do at once, and the leaping had never once made the morning come sooner or the work turn out better. She set the bowl on the floor beside her chair. She folded her hands in her lap. The heat of the soup had reached at last that cold place under her breastbone, or had come as close to reaching it as it ever did, and the reaching was enough, the trying was enough, the heat pressing at the edge of the cold like a hand laid on a shoulder in the dark. She let her head rest back against the carved leaves of the chair. Above her the herbs hung down their scent, thyme and marjoram and the chamomile that was for sleeping, and the grey bundle that was for nothing but the liking of it. The fire spoke to itself in faint clicks and settlings. The room was the colour of the inside of a lantern now, everything gone to amber and shadow, the whitewashed stove glowing, the copper on the shelf catching the light and holding it. She looked at it all through eyes that had grown heavy, and the room seemed to breathe with the fire, brightening as a log caught, dimming as it fell, brightening, dimming, the tide of firelight going out across the walls and drawing back. Her hands were warm. Her feet, in their felt boots, had taken the fire's heat. The cold under her breastbone had gone quiet, if not gone. Outside, the lamps on the fence posts burned their patient amber into the dark, a low crown of light around the sleeping yard, keeping the world at its respectful distance, keeping the peace she had made. She thought, without trying to think it, of all the evenings behind this one. They did not come as pictures now, only as a kind of glow, a sense of the great number of them, fires on fires on fires stretching back, each one tended, each one fed, each one sat beside until it burned low. How many bowls of soup? How many onions wept over? How many logs carried in and burned to nothing? It should have been a weariness, all that repetition, and once, far back, it had frightened her, the sameness of the days marching on without end. But somewhere in the middle of her life, the fear had turned over in its sleep and become its opposite. The sameness was the mercy. The bell rung at the same hour was not a prison. It was a hand that reached out of every single day and said, "Here, this again, this good thing again, for as long as you are here to have it." A log fell in the stove, and the little collapse of it sent a wave of heat out into the room, and she felt it move across her face like a hand passed close but not touching. The cat's ear turned toward the sound and turned back. She should climb to the stove bed soon, she knew, up onto the heated bricks where the old woman before her had slept, and the old woman before that, though she could not say if she had ever truly known those women or only dreamed them out of the many nights. Soon. Not yet, for now the chair held her well enough, and the fire was company, and her body had gone that particular kind of heavy that is not sickness and is not sorrow, but only the honest weight of a day fully spent, the limbs asking to be still, the eyes asking to close, the whole tired frame of her sinking down into the chair as if the wood were water and she were letting herself be held on it. She thought of the girl again, the one with the grief too large for her, though she had not thought of her in years and could not have said what called her up now. She had come in the spring, that girl, and stayed past the last snow, and one evening near the end of it she had asked in a small voice how the old woman bore it, the being so far out here, the sameness, the years. And Baba Yaga had not answered in words, because there were no words for it that a young person could yet hold. She had only ladled out another bowl and set it in the girl's hands and let the heat of it say the thing instead. This, you bear it like this, one bowl, one fire, one evening at a time, and you do not ask them to be more than they are, and in the not asking they become enough, and then, some evening you do not notice, they become plenty. This, the wind had come up a little in the trees. Not the rough wind of the day, but the evening's own breath, moving through the high birch tops, turning the leaves so they showed their pale undersides and hushed against each other, a long sound like water heard from far off. She had listened to that sound for so many hundreds of years that it had stopped being outside her. It was in her now. It was when the wind moved in the birches, something in her chest moved with it, some old rhythm that the world and her body kept together without either of them trying. The stream ran under it. The fire ticked over it. And down beneath the floorboards, the smallest goose gave one last low complaint about nothing at all, and then even she was quiet, and the hut held all of them, the woman and the cat and the 3 grey geese, the way it had held them through more winters than the villages had years. Her eyes closed and she let them. Behind them the firelight still reached her, a red glow that brightened and dimmed as the coals breathed, and she watched it through her lids the way a child watches the sun through closed eyes on a summer afternoon, the color of it, the tide of it. The scent of the herbs came down, the chamomile most of all now, the sleeping herb, released by the heat, drifting down from the rafters over her upturned face. She breathed it in, she breathed it out. Her hands lay open in her lap, palms up, empty and warm, the hands that had cut 10,000 onions and torn 10,000 mushrooms and laid poultices on the chests of feverish boys and held the shoulders of grieving girls, resting now, asking nothing, holding nothing, only at ease. The room dimmed as a log settled and brightened as the flame found a new edge and dimmed again. The lamps along the fence burned on in the dark outside, amber in the blue, patient as stars. The cat slept. The geese slept. The geese slept. The great oak mortar stood in its corner, holding its pine cones and its folded blanket, done with flying, if it had ever flown, content to be a thing that held other things now. The pot cooled on the back of the stove, the soup thickening as it cooled, ready for the morning, ready to be heated again and eaten again. The bell that would ring again at its own hour, whether or not she rose to hear it. But she would rise. She always had. There was no reason yet to think tomorrow would be the day she did not. After a while, when the fire had fallen low enough that the room had cooled at its edges, though the core of it held its heat, she opened her eyes and gathered herself to move. The stove bed called her, the heated bricks on top of the great clay stove where the last of the day's fire lived on in the very body of the thing until dawn. She set her hands on the arms of the chair and pushed, and the chair gave her up with its creak, and she stood a moment letting the room steady, one hand on the hot flank of the stove. Her body was all one ache and all one heat at once, the ache and the heat folded together the way they always were now, so that she could not feel where the tiredness ended and the comfort began. She reached down and gathered the folded blanket from the mortar. She shook it out. It smelled of the pine cones it had lain among, resin and dust and the faint green ghost of last year's forest. See, the steps up to the stove bed were shallow and worn, 3 of them cut into the clay by hands that were not hers, and she climbed them the way she did everything now, one thing at a time, her weight tested on each before she trusted the next. At the top, the bricks held the day's heat through her felt boots and through the layers of old wool she slept in, a heat that had been soaking into them since morning and would hold until the sun came round again. She lowered herself onto them. She lay down on her side, the way she had always slept, facing out into the room so she could see the last of the fire and the pale square of the window and the amber crown of the lamps beyond it. She drew the blanket over her shoulder. The bricks gave up their stored heat into her back and her hip and her legs, and she lay in it the way you lie in warm water, held, weightless, the aches loosening one by one as the heat found them. There was a little commotion below as the cat understood that the night's arrangements had changed. He rose, stretched his grey length, and came to the foot of the stove steps and looked up, and made the sound that was not quite a meow, the little chirping question he kept for exactly this. She patted the bricks beside her once. He came up in one flowing movement, young again for the length of that single jump, and he walked the length of her and turned and kneaded the blanket a while with his old paws, and then he folded down into the curve of her, his back against her belly, his heat adding to the heat of the bricks. Under her hand his side rose and fell. The purr began, felt more than heard, running through his old frame and into her palm and up her arm, an engine idling in the dark. From up here the room looked different, the way a familiar place always does from a new height, and she let her eyes wander it one last time before they closed for good. The stove glowed beneath her, its own heat holding her up. The table stood in shadow with the day's cloth still on it, and the knife laid clean beside the empty bowl. The pot cooled on the back of the iron, with the morning's meal already waiting inside it. The herbs hung down from the rafters, the whole summer of them, breathing their dry scent into the dark. And along the far wall, the great mortar kept its patient watch, the thing the stories most feared, holding nothing now but pine cones, harmless as a hollow log, done with whatever it had been before, and content, as she was content to be what it had become. The cow moved once more in the birches, that far-off water sound, and passed, and left a stiller quiet behind it than before. The stream ran on beneath. The geese slept under the floor. The Gez lamps burned amber in the blue dark, patient, needing nothing, giving their light to no one but the trees and the woman who had made them, and the cat curved close against her. She felt her breath find the long, slow measure it took at the end of every day, the tide of it, in on the rise, out on the fall, and she did not guide it, only let it go where breath goes when the body has decided to rest. The cold under her breastbone had gone. She could not have said when. Somewhere between the soup and the fire and the heated bricks it had loosened its old grip and slipped away, and there was only heat now, front and back, the cat before her and the stove beneath, and the blanket over all. The fire was low now, a bed of coals red under a fur of grey ash. It gave less light than before, and the room drew closer around it, the far corners going into shadow, the near things holding their amber. She watched it through eyes gone almost shut. A coal brightened, a coal dimmed, the tide of it slower now, further apart. The tide of it slower now, further apart. Her hand lay still on the cat's side. His breath lifted it, his breath let it down. The purr had eased into sleep. The heat of the bricks held her from below. The blanket held her from above. She was warm all the way through, at last, the way she was warm only here, Only now, only at the end of the day, with the soup made and the fire low, outside the lamps burned on, amber in the dark, one on each post, all the way round the yard, a low ring of light with the sleeping hut at its centre. The birches stood pale between them. The stream ran over its stones. The geese did not stir. A coal shifted in the stove and settled. The last flame stood up along one edge of it, blue and then gold, and leaned and lay down. The red deepened. The ash spread its grey. The room dimmed by the smallest degree and dimmed again, the light drawing back into the coals the way the tide draws back down the sand. Her breath went long, in on the rise, out on the fall. The wind stayed down, the trees held still. Nothing in the whole clearing moved but the breathing of the fire and the deeper breathing of the woman and the cat, rising and falling together in the dark, while beyond the window the lamps kept their patient watch over the wood, amber and unhurried, burning low and steady into the long quiet night.